we think of the 1960s civil rights movement in the United States, we often think of Martin Luther King Jr., Montgomery, Atlanta, Selma, and other areas in the South. However, demonstrations and marches took place in many parts of the country. Often overlooked for its role in the civil rights movement is Milwaukee, Wisconsin, sometimes called the Selma of the North. Father James Grappi, a white Catholic priest and advisor to the NAACP Youth Council, had traveled to Selma and marched with Martin Luther King. Having learned the power that can come from peaceful demonstrations, Father Grappi decided it was time to take issues to the street of Milwaukee. In August 1966, Father Grappi and the Youth Council decided to protest the Eagles Club membership policy forbidding non-white members. Many elected officials and judges belonged to the Eagles Club. The Youth Council thought it unfair that they belonged to a white-only organization, since many of these judges heard cases involving African Americans. After first picketing at the Eagles Club itself, the Youth Council decided to focus on Judge Robert C. Cannon, demanding that he either resign from office or from the Eagles Club. Despite his liberal record in matters of race, Judge Cannon refused to step down. As a result, the Youth Council organized marches at Judge Cannon's home in Tosa, Wisconsin, a quiet, white suburb. Most of the marchers were under age 18. The scene attracted counter-protesters from across the nation and local and national media. The National Guard was called in to help keep peace over the 11 nights of marches. By using conflict to bring an issue into the open, local protests such as this one forced people to make a choice about where they stood on racial segregation. Today, you will hear from 4 people who were involved in the Wauwatosa Eagles Club March in 1966, and you will feel what it was like to be there.
All the eyes of the entire community on an issue. A real, I guess the word you'd use is volatile, a real kind of a mixed up time in Milwaukee's history. Part of it was the very beginnings of the civil rights movement in Milwaukee. The Eagles Club was the first time that it really became sort of a major media event.
In the 1960s, the Eagles Club was a national organization that focused on charitable fundraising. Local chapters of the Eagles Club held power in the politics and economics of cities because members of the power elite were expected to be a member of the Eagles Club. Since African Americans were not allowed in the Eagles Club because of the national policy excluding non-white members, it kept them out of political power of most cities. The Milwaukee chapter of the Eagles Club was the second largest in the nation.
Father Grappi demanded that he resign from the Eagles Club. And my father took the position that he thought he could be more effective staying in the Eagles Club and trying to get the Eagles to voluntarily give up their racial discrimination clause.
It was beautiful. In Wauwatosa, we marched there almost every night for about a month.
Somebody would call up and say, I'm going to firebomb your house, or I'm going to burn your house down, or I'm going to shoot at your house. I remember a couple of things. I was sitting in our front living room one night, and I heard some noise, some chanting. And I looked out the window, and across the street I saw a group of people coming down Wisconsin Avenue. And so I was quite shocked because we didn't know anything about this or the possibility that we'd be the target of a demonstration.
Cowards waited, those who did what they did, waited until the darker area where they couldn't very well be seen. They weren't right on the street, they would stand back on the sidewalk where they were right and lob garbage and bottles overhead. It was a shameful night. It was a night I never thought I'd see in Milwaukee, Wauwatosa, Wisconsin.
And eventually the crowds were estimated at about 5,000 people. The National Guard had to be called in because neither the sheriffs nor the police combined could handle that size crowd.
That was the first time I ever saw a Ku Klux Klan in person.
All of a sudden, you had the American Nazi Party show up in swastika. The Ku Klux Klan showed up in their regalia. The American Communist Party showed up. I think it was the Outlaws motorcycle gang showed up.
The actions of the hecklers and the presence of the Ku Klux Klan and National Guardsmen turned the protest into a scene of racism and hatred that made the neighbors, the community, and eventually the nation rethink its stance on segregation. It was clear that this issue could no longer be quietly ignored.
The fear, the threats, and the throwing of bottles, the curses, the yelling, the garbage, if they might have broken and run, they did not. They maintained discipline. The marshals were directing them, their own marshals, and they held their heads high and marched back to the buses on Hawley Road.
We had that whole 76th Street blocked off at Wisconsin Avenue. For you to get in there, you had to either be a member of the NAACP Youth Council or one of the other demonstrating groups. And the demonstrating groups were allowed in, but the spectators were kept out. So that was kind of how they accommodated the free speech, the competing free speech interests of all these different groups.
They did not have any sympathy for us. I felt like they were on the heckler's side. I was scared, and I felt proud because I was doing something that was close to my heart. I was raised in a family that was into civil rights during the time.
And the marchers came by, and I remember thinking really clearly, you can watch or you can march. And I chose to march. Pretty soon I was in that line. I recall, seeing the faces on the other side of the police lines and realizing that I probably made the right choice. This was not people I wanted to be with. On the far side. Here I am, Grappy and all the folks right behind us, and the kid and I holding a flag between us. And right in front of us is kind of a phalanx, sort of a spearhead of National Guardsmen with their bayonets drawn, with their rifles and bayonets drawn.
The hecklers threw a cherry bomb, and the bomb landed next to us. My brother was 6 years old, and I had him by the hand. And when the bomb landed by us, it knocked us over, knocked us on the ground.
On the national Eagles level, they changed the policy the following year, or possibly 2 years later.
The policy probably changed because of people like Cannon inside saying this is stupid.
After 11 nights, the NAACP Youth Council stopped marching and agreed to negotiations instead. While some could view this compromise as giving up, there were concessions made by the other side. Judge Cannon did not resign, but Milwaukee Mayor Henry Meyer did. Eventually, the Eagles Club changed its national admission policy to include non-whites. More importantly, the marches had achieved a major goal: to bring awareness to the injustice of racial segregation. It was almost a favor that Judge Cannon would not quietly resign. It gave the marches a clear enemy to protest. Local neighbors, as well as people viewing the events through the media, were forced, just like the marchers and counter-protesters, to choose sides. Compromise had to take place that would end segregation in institutions like the Eagles Club. As stated in the Milwaukee Journal by one Wauwatosa neighbor, "The city will never be the same again." He was right. A stand had to be taken on issues of race. White-only institutions were called to compromise to allow all people equal opportunities. The Eagles Club March was just the beginning of the civil rights movement in Milwaukee, a local movement that affected national change and opened the eyes of many.
25 years later, Jim Grappy became fatally ill with cancer. And as he was dying in the hospital, my father went over to the hospital to visit him shortly before he died, and to basically shake hands with him and wish him luck and tell him that he would be in my father's prayers and in our family's prayers.